thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm going to stand for a little bit, but we really want to hear from everybody in the panel, so I will sit down eventually. We're just going to go through a few background slides to see, kind of sense where people are. So the question we want to ask you is, what is ethics? And this is not going to be a lecture. This is not going to be anything like school. I want you to just think about it for a second. I'm going to give you 4 options. There's many answers. There's more than 4 answers. It's a very rich subject, but I'm going to give you 4, and I'm going to ask you to choose which of these 4, by a show of hands, would you pick as your primary choice for what is ethics. Okay, so let's go through them. Hopefully they're clear enough. How many people would say A? No hands. How many people would say B? I would say approximately half the room, 3/4?
No. At least a third.
At least more than that. I say almost half.
You can see people?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Maybe even 60%, let's just say. C, carefully consider our choices. That looks to me about maybe 10 to 15%.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And D, a bunch of BS. Anybody really hating on ethics? 1. Okay, there's always 1. I'm going to make fun of you a little bit. I apologize. I did the same poll on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and the results were pretty similar. There were a few people who do it for moral or religious reasons. They say that's what ethics is about. It's often what we're told it's about. I think a lot of people responded similar to you. It's our duty to each other. And a few, similar ratios said best overall. And there's, of course, one person who said, I don't care about ethics. So maybe that was you again in the poll. We'll see. But I guess the question that you have to ask after you answer this question, if you said A, then there's a follow-on question is, which set of moral or ethical principles do you follow, and why that and why not the others? I'm not going to answer that today. It's up to you to think about. If you answered B, then you have to ask, well, why these people and not those people? To whom do we owe this? Is it to everybody? Does it include animals? Does it include people in an enemy country? These are things we really have to think about when we answer B. For C, we have some difficulties thinking about how can we do the most good for the least harm. So it's a good goal to try to make the most of every choice we make, but it's very difficult to try to think this through. And if you said D, then either potentially you believe in hedonism or nihilism, or you may be a sociopath. So something to think about. Okay, we have a really fine panel today, and not in the order that I presented, because I assumed the stage would be inverted from this. So we have, starting at the right, we have Evo Heyning, who has a rich tradition in this field, and even before XR, as a producer, strategist, creator, artist. She's leading on the open metaverse, very important group to try to make sure that the metaverse is open. That's one of the ethical principles that we'll get to later on. And has also done just a ton of stuff in the space. Damon Hernandez, I've known for years. He's been running AWE panels and that since before I can remember. He works in the field, designer, developer, entrepreneur, executive. Some of the most important things he's worked on, among others, Idea Builder, Samsung. And he also runs a bunch of hackathons, which are incredibly useful for people getting into the field to mentor and welcome people into this rich, diverse field. And then you have Holly Hirzel, who I've known for probably even longer than I've been in the field. We went to college together. But she also, followed on, worked on HoloLens. She's on a thing called Project Archer, which she can't talk about. Worked at Sony Entertainment, and is just a really, top-notch PM producer, is able to get just about anything done. So, and I don't know if she's looking for a job right now. I think she's pretty happy. So don't try to steal her.
My new boss is in the
yes,
audience.
She's very happy.
Very happy.
Okay, so there's 2 people who couldn't be here today.
Hi, everyone. It's Tony. Sorry I can't be there in person, but due to prior commitments, I am elsewhere in the world. Thanks to the magic of the metaverse, I could be here with you for just a minute or two to say hello. And hope that you have a great panel today. I know we're talking about the XR Guild and ethics in the metaverse. Why do we need ethics in the metaverse? Well, if you think about the last generation of technology we brought upon the world, it's clear that there are issues that arise in the use of technology, and as practitioners and purveyors of that tech, I think it is on us to some degree to make sure that we do anything in our power we can to ensure, or at least encourage, that it is used in a responsible way. In particular, it's clear to me that you can't have freedom without privacy. So it's very important to ensure the privacy of anyone using new technologies like spatial computing and being connected in the metaverse in ways that can potentially track us and see what our behaviors are and then manipulate us based on that. So I think we'd all agree that that's something we would not want to happen as citizens of the metaverse, as users of this technology, without our consent. So at a minimum, we need to be able to make sure that anyone using this tech opts in for that and is not being subjected to forces like that without their prior knowledge. The other thing that's very important is that every person counts. And this is diversity, equity, and inclusion, but at its base, it's not about particular subgroups. It's about everyone having an opinion and a voice. So to that end and to many other ends, I am a signatory to the XR Guild. I believe in its principles, and I think you may too. And so I hope you have an enjoyable panel. Thanks to Avi and Evo and Damon and anyone else participating and helping with this panel. And we'll see you all very soon in the metaverse.
Hi, I'm Amy Peck. I am the founder and CEO of EndeavorXR. I'm also a very proud member of XR Guild. And in fact, I'm even more proud of the fact that I was one of the early members. In fact, Avi and Tony had basically started a framework for this on a Google Doc and shared the Google Doc with me and said, is this something you'd be interested in? And I was like, yes, absolutely. And, there are so many reasons that I joined. And I think, for me personally, it's something that I think about a lot. I think, I look at the landscape and, I'm generally very, I like to say protopian about the future. But I do see some pitfalls. And I see, companies who, have maybe not had the best track record in ethics, not necessarily sort of changing path. And I've found maybe sometimes it's just a challenge to make ethical decisions, on your own without support. Also just in the thick of it, right? Because we're all working so hard. So I think it's really important to be able to have a community to turn to, have a support group, have a network. And I also love the fact that there's a lot of thought really put into the principles, right? And, if you don't agree with the principles, that's fair. But if you do, join this community and, really the idea of just helping each other is something that really appeals to me. And I think we can all hold each other accountable and just help each other understand what it is to be much more consistent in considering the types of decisions that we're making and what are the ethical ramifications of every decision. And so far, so good. But we'd love to have more people join. We'd love to have more voices. So if this resonates with you, if this is something you have concern with, if you have, some ideas about how we can improve outcomes with immersive technology, then this is a place for you to have a voice. So I hope you'll join us.
All right. So we would have preferred that everybody remote was also live. And then we would have had that not be as big of a chunk. We would have broken it up into smaller questions, but we gave them all, 2.5 minutes to say their piece, and folks on the panel are going to get a little more time to talk to some of these issues. So what do we want to do with the remaining time, the next phase of this? We'll have a Q&A. We'll have a lot of time for Q&A, and then we may even have some time at the end, if there's time left over, to actually do some ethical practice, to actually go through a question and let everybody have their say about that question. What we fundamentally are about is asking this question, the Guild is, what if everybody had more support in their roles, whatever they do, to make more ethical choices? What would be the outcome? Would things be worse or would things be better? And our proposition is that things would be better. Bad things don't happen simply because we make choices that are bad. They happen because sometimes we don't have the time to think about things. We don't have the time to think through the ramifications of our choices. And we don't always include all the people who would help in making those choices, people who are different than us, who would have different voices, different things to share. So what we're hoping is overall that we can help the field by making more space, more room for everybody to be able to make those choices in whatever their roles are. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to sit down, and each of these next slides is going to have a question, and I'd really like each of the panelists to take their best shot at answering the question, and we'll have a little bit of a sort of crimp sheet at the end for anything we forgot to say for the takeaway. But I think it's really important that everybody personalize this and talk about this from their own perspectives. It's not just me and a few people talking. I think we really want to get more opinions and more reasons for this. So the first question, and I'll sit down now, is why does the world need the XR Guild? So maybe we'll run down from Evo first and go in that order.
So I'm a creator-producer. I know many of you are executives or engineers. Many of you are also wearing multiple hats. And coming out of Hollywood, I recognized that both Writers Guild and Producers Guild gave me strength in order to be able to tackle challenging conversations. And that was often in the pre-development process, right? But on an AR project or on a VR project, I would have to call up a friend. I didn't have a place to go to be able to say, hey, does this sit right? Or what would you go back to the board with given this situation, right? There was no sounding board. And so I recognized that the world and my industry, my professionals, my colleagues, needed a guild, needed a place to drop in, needed a place to go find the resources and find each other so that we could bounce off of each other.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, just moving down. I think it's important for me because as a person who deals a lot with the built environment and then seeing the way that it is, mashing and spatial web and all these other things. So as our digital world and real world combine, I think there's a lot of privacy that can be lost and people need to be in place. So when I have this device on and your children are over at my house scanning my house that's going somewhere, I think there needs to be a body of like-minded individuals who aren't swayed by big corporate to really kind of, I don't want to say be the police isn't the right word, but help kind of keep things in check, right? That friend that needs to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And that's what I'm really hoping with this group is to be able to see not just those that represent the built environment, but any sector, creatives or whatever, again, be able to work with other badass individuals and then just, hopefully keep everything in the way that we want it to go.
I am looking for a repository of failures and mistakes. So as you may remember, working at HoloLens, there were quite a few things that were substantial whiffs in a handful of ways. Being able to pick up different skin tones, being able to pick up facial hair or not being able to pick up facial hair, things like that for Connect and for HoloLens. So for me, I want a place to be able, when I learn something about what not to do, I want to be able to share that with other people in a very non-specific, NDA-protected kind of way. But nevertheless, I think it's important to communicate the whiffs.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, totally agree. And many of us have worked on very top secret projects. I still can't talk about some of the things that I worked on. And that is one of the biggest challenges, is how do you help people when they can't even say what they're working on? They can't just come to a meeting and say, hey, I have this problem at work. But what we can do is, having been through some of the same processes, provide materials, videos, short two-pagers that talk about other people having made those decisions in other contexts, and those can become useful. But even just the processes that we used, the way that we went about experimenting and learning is something that could be useful for everybody to try to find better answers and to not have to recreate the same mistakes that everybody else made, right? We should be making bigger and better mistakes all the time, not just doing the same ones over and over again.
Exactly. I love your answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a good one. Moving on.
This is the first time the board has been together, by the way, so we are having a wonderful
Yes.
time getting to know each other.
Yes.
Not in the Brady box.
Okay, so what we also wrote down, just in case we didn't say it, was that we don't really train people for ethics inside. The big companies do their standard obligatory yearly training, but they're not training you why. They're not training you why not having good diversity is bad. It's not just a moral issue, it's a practical issue. That more diversity means more voices, it means better products. And also better products for the customers that you want to serve. And so it's just essential, but they just cover what to do and what not to do. And so we think there needs to be a deeper understanding. Unfortunately, it sounds boring philosophical. How many of you have seen The Good Place? Just a quick show of hands. If you haven't, highly recommend it because the show isn't all about somebody standing at a whiteboard lecturing. That's sort of the counterpoint to a lot of what's going on, but the ethics underlies the decisions that the characters make in the show, and you find it fun. You don't find it like you're being lectured to, and I think that's one of the brilliant aspects of that show. But ethics comes up whether we talk about it or not. It's baked into user-centered design. It's baked into design thinking. It's the fundamental reason why diversity, equity, inclusion is important. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's the correct thing to do. And also think of all the unintended consequences, like Holly talked about, all the cases of machine learning going wrong because it didn't have the right inputs and it didn't have the right supervision. Those are things we need to fix. We're responsible for those things.
One thing I want to just chime in here about, because I heard this, because dealing with the built environment sector, I mean, that's one that's also approaching this, especially on the diversity and inclusion. And something that I heard a woman say that makes more sense is change that really to business scalability. In this day and age, if you want a scalable business, that isn't something you do, that is a part of the fabric of your makeup. And I think just to the XR Guild, another thing we need is a place to have difficult conversations, but it's a safe space. It's like in martial arts when you spar with someone, you're giving them, you need to have discomfort, but to achieve and then grow. And so that's another thing I just want to say before we get off this slide of why I think we need an XR Guild is because we have to have a safe space to have very difficult conversations, especially when I'm getting over my own bias with someone else.
Right.
And a lot of those conversations right now are in small spaces. They're in a Zoom room, they're in a private space, or even in WebXR, we have like 20 people in the room. And so part of the question is, how do we make a bigger table? How do we invite everyone in? And that includes the students and the people who aren't in this room right now. So all of you play a role in that engagement process and that invitation to the inquiry and to ask these questions together.
How do I know someone's not going to screenshot one of my dumb questions and tweet it?
Ooh. Next slide.
Yeah. And moving on. We turn off all phones.
Principle about that. That has not happened.
That will happen.
For the record.
That will happen, though. It will.
We do have standards of behavior as well that are part of the principles. We'll talk about the principles later. And those standards of behavior include respect for other people and not treating people poorly. We've incorporated the W3C Code of Ethical Conduct as part of ours as well. And so that would be a concern that if somebody did behave like that, they may not be sitting at the table with us.
Ethically engaging when we are capturing data and when we stop capturing data so that people know and can understand.
Exactly.
Okay, next question. Who should join? Who wants to take it first?
Anyone that cares about ethics.
Yeah.
Not just for professionals, but also for those who are new in the career, not just for XR, but that also includes obviously AR, VR, and all of the things that touches too.
Well, and one thing I'd say that's awesome about technology is that we touch so many different industries that also are dealing with this, and seeing the way that the tech culture and mindset, certain elements are bleeding in, right? There are more industries that are open now, following that. So I hope that we're simulating reality. So I hope we can set a precedent for really anyone that sees, hey, okay, maybe there's something here to get value from.
Thoughts?
I'm hoping that younger people join, students, like you said, and people new to the industry. Because
Definitely.
at least we'll be able to expose them to things that I didn't even think about for the first 15 years of my career.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was very lucky in my career, in my 30 years, that there was almost always somebody there to suggest the next gig for me, to help me with that networking. And it was partly a result of originally crappy work I did, but they saw promise and they got me in the door to the next place. And we want to help with that as well. So we're thinking that the guild could be full of people who both have 20 or 30 years experience as well as people who have no experience. And that's very much like one of the reasons we call it a guild. We don't want to have one thing we don't want from the old guilds is the journeyman apprentice model. It's not about rank, but it's about being able to have the people with the experience share that experience and mentor people who are asking for it and formalize the mentorship in a way that it becomes a relationship. And that's one of the questions is what's in it for me. One of the answers is we all could use mentoring at various times in our career, and we can all provide it based on the things we've already learned. Mostly, the only thing that is a requirement, honestly, for joining the Guild is to agree to the set of ethical principles. You define what professional is. You can be an academic, you can be a student. You just need to be serious, right, about the ethics. You need to take it seriously and read through them. We ask you to checkbox each one of them before joining to make sure you've read them and agree. And we want people in the Guild who feel the same way about that minimum set of ethics. Now, some people may want to go further and have more stringent ethics about things like advertising. There may be other people who have strong feelings about that, and other people who might be completely opposed to that contention, and that's okay. That's a discussion that we can have. I've had this discussion personally with many people that I know inside of Facebook or Meta about the different philosophies and different business models, and we've been able to have these discussions in a very cordial and understanding way. Mm-hmm. Not that my tweets are always cordial and understanding, but the conversations person to person are.
And you'll notice this is different than other guilds in that we've kept the barrier to entry very low so that everyone can participate, but the ethical engagement is high.
Right.
We don't need people paying $1,000 per the way Producers Guild and other guilds work.
But
However,
you can pay $1,000 if you
We
want.
do accept
we are
donations.
set up as a nonprofit organization,
As the
which is the
treasurer.
next piece of that puzzle, right?
Yes.
So we are officially a 501c3 organization. And what that means is absolutely you can make tax-exempt donations, and you can also participate as part of your charitable participation at your companies as well.
And I think important to go with that is that we're all volunteers. So we're not raising so much money that this is going to be our job to pay our salaries. We still have day jobs and other things that we need to do. This is all volunteer. And we have made a difficult decision as well not to seek sponsorship from organizations that might want to influence the outcome of what we do. So we want to be very clear that it's only small donations that we're taking, and it's meant to further the cause of the Guild, not to pay for anything that we might need personally.
Exactly.
And so I think that's really important. And the other thing I want to say, I want to really make sure that this comes across as being something that people at the big companies should consider. And I'm talking specifically about, about Mang, or I like to say manga. I don't know why we spell it the way we do, but at the big companies, a lot of us have worked there. We know what it's like, and we know a lot of the restrictions people are under. We also know what a lot of the criticisms have been, and it must be hard to be in a company that is criticized. I know how it feels to be in Microsoft in 2008, and even today to think back. So what we want to do is be very sensitive to that. We don't blame people. We never blame the employees for the business model of the company. That's a choice that comes from the top of the company. But what we do want to do is create a safe space to have these discussions. To the extent people can talk about things, they can. To the extent that NDAs prevent it, we can provide a way of passing information one way. So we go from public to private, never private to public, and still be helpful to people who are in those companies. The most important thing is the people in those companies know that they have support of other people within the same magic circle. So there'll be more than one person within one of those companies that you can turn to who is disclosed on the project that you want to talk about, that you can talk about. And you have allies within the project. That's really important, I think, to have that level of support. Good? Mm-hmm. Okay, next slide. So we wanted to try to think of some examples, and this is a little hard to think about off the top of your head, but we'll do our best to think of some examples of where ethics infusions have worked, and maybe some places that lacked ethics in history, not modern times mostly, but history, where things didn't go right. And it's important to think about to bolster this point of why is ethics important. So let's think of a few examples.
I grew up in colonial Virginia, so if you're aware of growing up in the colonial South, it has certain dynamics that don't work for whole populations that were erased. For example, Native Americans in America.
Yeah, similar. I mean, I grew up in the South and in a small town, so there were a lot of things that didn't work well. I mean, I feel social media right now is kind of an interesting space in itself, so.
Examples of deficits of ethics.
Yeah.
So modern, not like
You can pick anything.
eye
you
for
want.
an
Anything-
eye kind
anything.
of thing.
Eye for an eye is a good example.
Which is the ethics of that time, but wouldn't hold. So what's the difference between ethics and common sense?
That is a great question. I think it's a really hard question to answer. Do you want to take a stab at it?
No.
I'll take a quick stab at it. I think only because we were talking about this at lunch, and we have something of an answer. Maybe not the best answer, but common sense, I think, is the things that you learn to do and not do by experience. You make mistakes. You learn the stove is hot. Don't put your hand on the stove. We learned throughout history that just allowing people to rampantly kill other people was bad for society. It made for not the kind of society we want. Even when somebody felt just to seek vigilante justice for somebody who may have committed a crime. The person committed a crime, you want to cut off their hand, you want to kill them. That seemed like a good idea at the time, but maybe our perspective now is that's not the best way to have a society because it an eye for an eye makes everybody blind. It's not proven itself out to be a viable model in a modern society. And so we say, don't kill. Only certain people in our society are empowered to make those kinds of judgments.
Don't kill in reality.
Don't kill in reality. In fantasy, hey, that's a whole other thing. But we're not talking about that. So I think the difference in common sense and ethics is that ethics are the hard things that we have to think about. They're not so obvious. They're not just things that we learned through experience, but they're things that we have to go, so what are the ramifications if I were to make choice A versus choice B? It's not obvious, and you only find out by doing it. And in retrospect, it becomes common sense. But going forward, it's the ethical considerations you have to make in order to try to do your best to answer the question before you do the thing.
So when I saw the Snapchat doodad on stage a couple hours ago, they show the light that makes it clear that you're recording. And I think they do that on HoloLens too. So it's an example of what to me is common sense, but it has its roots in contemporary, the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Consent. It's making consent visible.
Well, and understanding
way.
consent, because I think that's the other thing is a lot of people may agree to the terms of service, but they probably have not read it. They don't understand actually what the legalese means. So I think it's education to what am I consenting to, not just as much as hit okay.
Clicking yes.
And that might be good discussions to have about whether the light should be brighter so people know what it is, that it's not just, some people might interpret that light as a floodlight, as something just to illuminate the scene and not about recording. And the color choice of the light. There may be colors traditionally that we use for recording, like at least in this country, red light means record, and white light might not be the right choice. So if you wanted to think it through, maybe you make different choices.
Yeah.
So many of these user experience choices get made over decades and lots of trial and error. And so reducing the error in the trial, hopefully, so that we can get to those positive outcomes more quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's some examples that we...
Apart from the sanitation, the medicine, education, wine, public order, irrigation, roads, the fresh water system, and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us?
Felt obliged to play that clip. What have the Romans ever done for us, except for irrigation, the water supply, roads? But in every colonial empire, there's both something that the empire brings and also every historical example, there's a huge deficit of ethics of what are the impacts, the negative impacts that the occupying power has on the indigenous population. What is lost? What is erased? And so the ethical considerations really don't have ever come into that until more modern times where we can actually start to think this through. But historically, it's just been go in and take the riches. And maybe we make their lives better and maybe we don't, but that's a side effect. It's not for them. The World Wide Web is a good example of something we didn't think enough about the ethics of all the choices we made. And we left a lot of holes. We left a lot of security and privacy vulnerabilities in the web. And that's one of the things I mean when I said don't make the same mistakes. Like, we were naive when we built the web in thinking it's just a big library. We're going to connect all the information and then that's great. But we're doing it again with decentralization. We're saying if we just decentralize it and get everything away from the big corporations, everything will be better. Not necessarily. We have to think it through. So those are some examples. Manifest Destiny, as you're talking about, killing of the native people. It was also bad for the settlers. How many people died of dysentery or lawlessness or didn't have education for decades in the settlements? That was something they gave up as they moved west. And it was all promoted very much like the gold rushes of today as the thing to do.
Right.
Go west, young man.
But sometimes in technology, we all lose if we're not careful.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So some examples where ethics does help is Hippocratic Oath is a great one. That goes all the way back to Greek times. And it's not prevented every possible problem with doctors and scientists. There's always some rogue scientists and doctors who lack maybe even empathy. There's always examples of that. But it has helped. And today, doctors can be held accountable for decisions that they make. First, do no harm. First, think about the quality of care of the patient. And don't kill people. Military code of conduct is really a strong tradition of thinking it through from an ethical perspective, because there's a power structure. When officers have power over their subordinates, there's a lot that can go wrong. There's a lot of harm that can happen, and corporate America is just coming to grips with this now, but the military has dealt with this for ages, even when it was all men. The Geneva Convention is a good example. The Constitution, not always right. There's things about it we'd love to rewrite and make a little more modern in terms of the phrasing, but the intentions were there. There was a lot of foresight about trying to make the most ethical choices. And what's more important there is they documented it. There's the Federalist Papers that show what they were thinking when the Bill of Rights were written, so we can actually try to understand and interpret it now. And then there's speculative things in the future. Think about Star Trek. Prime Directive is a good example of an ethical principle that might have seemed like common sense at one point, because we came in and it fictionally messed up a whole bunch of civilizations before we decided don't do that again, right? And then we made it a principle. But nobody up front said don't do that. It seemed like the right thing to do to come in and help all the civilizations that we find. Okay, next question. What can we seriously do? Like, we're just people, right? None of us are powerful, none of us are rich, but there's many of us. So what can we do together and by having these conversations? Seriously, let's just put it on the line. Can we actually make a difference?
I would love agreements that protect kids a bit better, especially around WebXR experiences. That might be a place where they're vulnerable, for example, right? I'm a former educator. I've seen how many teenagers will find their ways into parts of the web that might be really dicey for them. And generally, things like kids protection aren't really well addressed beyond a very specific policy. Our industry is still trying to figure these things out. So where do we go to have that conversation, for example?
Yeah. And then I think facilitating, again, that environment just to have the conversations. I mean, that's what I'm excited about, is already in the Discord we have an amazing group of people at all ends of the spectrum. And I want to see that as the groups come together, where does the ground swell? You know, what is the focus and the interest at that time? And then just needing to do what needs to be done by a bunch of doers. And that's the other thing that I would just please ask, is if you are going to join the guild, do it to be active, right? I mean, whatever bandwidth you can have, if it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes, but please be a doer, and especially if you're a talker. You know, please do both. And that's why, you know, that's what I hope to seriously do, is to say, here are these issues that I care about, kind of like an unconference almost in a way, in time, and then say, who else wants to tackle this with me? And the one thing that I love about this area and any of the places of the world that I've been is that it's still one where groups of people can come together and you feel, you know, that you can execute and make amazing change. And so let's just figure out a way to do that and give people a place digitally as well.
As a product designer, I think of often how we prototype things and how we're going to get things from prototype stage to production stage, and the sorts of things that we tackle first versus later. And I think a lot about you know, accessibility, and are we doing things, especially in augmented reality, if you've got vision issues or hearing issues, or what if you only don't have all your fingers, and all these sorts of things. So for me, when I do prioritization exercises, I like to be able to have resources such as this group that can say, you know, if I'm like, I think we need to deal with people that, I don't, whatever, have X. It's nice to be able to have some support or some discussion or articles or anything that I can point to and say, I think we should prioritize this thing now because these are the issues that are coming up for my peers in their designs and in their products. So to be able to have that resources.
I have a super quick question for the audience. How many of you have tried to find some piece of research in our industry and have had a hard time finding it?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So yeah, one of the things we want to do is serve as a library function as well for the things that we bookmark and find important and really helpful. Not just a library of everything, but a library of this is what actually worked. And so we've talked a lot. This is one of the things we love about Magic Castle, and magicians have this. There's this beautiful building in LA where magicians go to both perform, to teach each other magic, to see other magicians and socialize, but there's a library there. And it's super helpful. So we want to create a virtual version of something like that that is a resource for everybody, but also the living people are also incredibly good resources. You know, I think supporting each other is definitely something we've talked about, publish papers, and I think the question is, what can we do differently? There are other groups that also care about ethics and care about results. Some of them are taking the tack of focus on public policy. That's great, we need that. Some of them are taking the tack of expose the wrongdoing, right? And talk about the CEOs and all this stuff. That's fine, right? I may agree or disagree with parts of it, but what we want to focus on is this bottoms-up approach where we start with the people who are doing the work. We start with people in the companies and find enough commonality among us so that eventually maybe we can get to this idea of a Hippocratic Oath for our field, if people agree to it. It's something we can force people to do, but if enough people agree, it becomes a thing, right? And we have to figure out what that would say, what it would mean, and what do we do when somebody's not following that? How do we even think about that? We don't know. These are questions we want to try to think about. And it's not about trying to be authoritarian. It's about trying to actually come from everybody and crowdsource these decisions so that it's something we've all bought into. Not everybody will. I think if I had to guess, we're saying if we could get to 70% of people agreeing to this, that's success. That's enough success that even if there is a certain sociopath in a certain company and they don't care about any of this, they'll still feel pressure to do the right thing, even if they don't care about it, because everyone else around them will be putting that pressure on to do the right thing. And so we think having enough people in this will make it work. So we have to figure out how to scale. How do we reach all these people? How do we make it low enough cost and accessible enough and not noisy? And there's already people who find Discord is too noisy and mute it. So we have to think through how to make these things accessible to everybody and how to make it great. But that's our goal. That's what we're going to try to do. So at the end of the day, it's just normal. It's just part of the job to take a moment more than we take today to think about the ethics of any decisions that we're going to make and the impacts. And the end result, we assume, will be better products, better results, happier employees, happier companies, happier bosses, happier consumers, because we will have thought these things through. So, of course, there is a don't list, and this one we don't have to crowdsource too much. I think we all agree on the don't list. We've discussed this at nauseum. So we're not a union. We're not going to do collective bargaining. We're not going to go on strike for any particular cause. And we're not there to try to get everybody a better salary. That's not our charter. And we're not a social club as well. I think that we want people to socialize and meet each other, but that's not the reason to come here. As Damon said, the reason to come is to try to do good. And so we want to do good with people who also want to do good. And it's also not a place for punditry. I think we said that pretty clearly. And something we didn't mention yet is this idea of ethics washing. And so this is something I've seen with certain groups that I'm not going to name, but groups that wind up being funded by the large companies with agendas will often follow the same agendas for whatever reason. I think my guess is when you become addicted to a certain cash flow and you have payroll to make and you have to do that even as a nonprofit, you don't want to displease the people who are providing the funding to you, and so you may consciously or unconsciously align yourself with the message that they want to come out. And that can be considered a form of ethics washing. We want to try to avoid that by not taking funding from sources that we feel have an agenda. It's just something important to do. We're not going to allow companies to steer us. They're not going to be on a committee to tell us what to focus on, and they're not going to tell us where to spend our time. It's up to us. It's up to the individual people to decide. And we want to be very democratic about how we do that.
This is a guild for people, not companies.
Exactly.
Right? And no companies can join. We're not taking memberships from non-human entities, not even AI at this point. So what are those principles? Well, we're not going to have time to go through all of those, but I'm just going to have them listed up here real quick, and for some reason I have to click twice on each one because I did the animation poorly. But these are, if you go to our website, xrguild.org, these are not only listed, but there are bullet points for each one to unpack each idea. We thought really hard about these things because originally Every Person Matters wasn't the first one. Somebody said, why isn't Every Person Matters the first one? That should be the number one. And we're like, yeah, you're right, it should be. So let's fix that. Some of these you will see will mirror some of the things that Tony Parisi has put out about 7 rules for the metaverse. So those are incorporated here, not as 7 different principles, but we folded them together because we have more stuff to cover than just the design of the metaverse. But it should be interoperable, open, and extensible. We believe that. We also say it can't be that on day one. So we have work to do, right? We want to support that work. And this should benefit users and their communities, not unseen entities. This is where it starts to get really interesting, is that you don't find too many places saying this, that ultimately we're responsible for what we put out there. Like, it's us. We may not put our names on the product necessarily, but we built it. And those choices are our choices. And to the extent we had control over those choices, we should exert that control to have the best good, the most good that we can. There are also a lot of design patterns out there. So we want to be very cognizant of the design patterns that trick people, exploit people, and we want to call those out. But again, without shaming the companies, we want to end the bad patterns and stick with the good ones. We have a duty to help mitigate serious problems. That's part of the sort of thinking about a Hippocratic Oath. And the last one is, we all adhere to these principles. So sorry, I went fast on that one. Go back. I'm gonna have to animate the whole thing again. Let's see. Okay.
We'll get you there. One moment.
Click, 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 click.
Don't go too fast, then.
I'll have to pause towards the end. I already hit it too many times, probably. Let's see. 2 more. Let's see. Go to the website.
Our goal here is to make sure that the hard work you're putting in for decades doesn't get lost just because you change jobs or because the technology changes as
Okay,
well.
good.
Because so much of this is your legacies, it's your careers and your livelihoods. And for all of that research to be kept in a vault somewhere where no one else can reach it doesn't serve all of us. So how do we work better together to make sure that those connections are made? That's part of why we're here. And xrguild.org is the next URL, and I want you to take a picture and actually go there or come to the Discord and join, because that's where we can actually continue this conversation beyond this moment today. We're going to open up the mic, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm not totally sure. The clock says we have 3:23, but I thought we started with 45, and I thought we had 50, but whatever.
All right.
However much time we have, what we'll do is Q&A for as long as people want.
One question.
And if there's time left, we thought we actually could sit, whoever wants to, and actually start one of these ethical debates. And what we're going to be doing on Friday for people who RSVP through the website or email me is we're going to do this in person, not in an audience format, but with roundtables. So we actually all sit around the table and talk in small groups. That's the way to have these conversations. This is not the easiest way for us to hear you. But have at it, and please use the mic so it gets recorded.
Yeah, ethically, you have 10 minutes. So who?
Thank you so much.
Hi. I find what you're doing so incredibly important. I really want to thank you. This is so great to hear people talk like this.
Thank you.
Good job, you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my question has to do with services versus products. Okay, I used to be an architect, and I knew who I was working for and what they were doing with my work. I knew they weren't designing a prison. I knew that they were designing a school. Now I'm creating a product in AR that anybody can buy and use. So like people have been coming up to me and saying, oh, you should really meet with the FBI or the CIA about this. And that's not my idea of how I want it used, but they could use it. So how does that work with the ethics? What are your thoughts about that?
Can you think of a way, knowing your product,
Yeah.
if you were to enlist help, do you think it's possible that you could help design out some of the bad uses that you could think of so that you could make it difficult for someone to abuse your product in a way that you wouldn't want them to do it? Is there more that can be done?
Well, it'd be kind of difficult because it's for design and construction. So people can design and build things which are good and things which are bad. And it actually makes an ethical question, should I be making the decision?
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
if you don't, who will? I mean, you're making it.
Okay.
But I think the end user could use it for some nefarious purpose. I'll give you an example
Yeah.
from my history. So I worked on, it was called Keyhole, but it became Google Earth, right? It was a tool, I think, on the whole, I'd say 98% good. Educates people about the world, shows them the spatial relationships of this country. I didn't know Cambodia was next to, like you can fly around the world, and I used to just follow the train tracks and really, really geek out. But it reportedly was also used by terrorists for planning. And some countries, one of the ways that they try to restrict this is the country will limit the resolution of the imagery in their sensitive places. So fortunately, you can look for the places where the imagery is lowered and know there's something there that you can't see, but you can't see it. So we've limited the ability of those people to act nefariously, they have to use other mechanisms, which are readily available through other sources. They can find high-res maps. We just didn't want to make it super easy for anybody to abuse it. So I think we fulfilled our ethical obligation to make it hard to do bad things, but you can never prove 100% that you've done that. And always going to be criticisms. I think as a product maker, I think one of the things you can do is state your ethical principles on the product and say where you're coming from, and hopefully that might deter some people from using it who might disagree with those and increase the good uses of that product as well.
Yeah, I mean, you have control over your terms of service and your EULA, and that's where you have control and some support from like Supreme Court and others who will back you up if you say this is not to be used in this way. That's where the line is sort of current.
Great question.
Yep. Coming. I'm getting my points on my watch. Okay.
Hey there, my name's Emmy. It's good to see you guys up there. I wanted to ask a question about like ethical funding. I'm working with a company, Stardust XR, and I printed these shirts 2 days ago. I made business cards because I was like, I'm going here, you guys can't, so I'm just gonna go and see what happens. So I'm here, and the advice I got was like, yeah, like stealth mode, patents, boom, boom, this. I brought it to them, and they're like, absolutely not. We're not interested in that. Free, open source, 501c3, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, okay. How do you do that?
How do you fund an open source endeavor and still make sure that everyone can make
Yeah, for a company that needs money to get to an MVP and also needs to eat, and the lead engineer wants to be able to pay people who do work for them, what do they do?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the other open source products like Blender that have built a strong basis of support behind them. And you need to figure out where those relationships are already there, where you can line up, say, okay, you're already here, you want to support us too. But you have to find the ones who are willing to fund open source. And you can absolutely have that open source project fundraised directly through GitHub and other places as well, Open Collective, obviously. If you're already an organization, then you can go to foundations and philanthropic funders as well. And they will fund open source quite a bit. There are new funds coming for open source as well. Those have not generally been announced, but there are some coming. So it's okay to stay open source and say this is who we want to take money from, but you have to make it super public. You have to give them the like one-click wonder kind of pages, the Open Collective, the GitHub kind of pages. Just a quick, that's not to solve your problem. I think coming back into the Guild and asking these questions of a broader community can help. And we're going to have a table on Friday around open source questions. So come to the coffee and have that conversation with other people too.
Thank you.
She's good.
No shit, I like your answer.
Good answer.
Love y'all's answers.
And can you repeat where your coffee is again for everybody?
Meeting room.
Great America Meeting Room 3, but please RSVP
Upstairs.
because we're not supposed to have more than a certain number of people. And if everybody shows up, we have to pay a lot more money.
And you can join the
Exact-
Discord to RSVP as well.
Opposite end of the
We only bought so much coffee
FYI.
and whatnot. But if you do want to come, please just come to the Discord. We have a special channel. Just let me know that you'll be there. I will put you on the list. And we're at about 20 now, but we can.
We have room for 50, I think. We have room for
well,
50 more.
30 without paying. We can stretch it to. They've been very nice to us. Free room. The food isn't free, but they bent over as much as they can
Got it.
for compromises. But if we go over 30, then they're not going to be as happy with
Or
us.
jump on the Zoom.
Hey guys, really good talk, very important subject. This is just a brief question, and I want to follow up with it later. I definitely would like to come for the further discussions, but given the principles you believe in and you're forming a guild and it's this kind of communitarian body where there's presumably going to be more democratic decision-making with a concentration on ethics and putting values above other kind of interest considerations. Have you thought of any kind of decision-making mechanisms that can help solve the intrinsic coordination problems, collective action problems when there's maybe people don't have an individual interest to do something alone because it's not effective or it's too risky. But if X number of other people join them simultaneously, then it would be a sure thing.
Yeah.
So have you thought about that?
Mechanisms for collective action.
About the AI.
Tell them about the secret AI.
No, you're not supposed to talk about that. The AI will not let us discuss it. Here's the model we're thinking about. Everything's open to discussion, right? Nothing. We have bylaws, but even the bylaws, we were like, I wrote them and we agreed to them. We could change them. The key idea is if a small group of people are motivated, start the work. Start doing it on your own, and we'll help you. We want to support those few people who are motivated to do something. Sorry, I have to sit up here to see you, but that's unusual for me because I'm usually the tallest person in the room. But we want to support them, and then when something grows, we want to help them add more people. And then the guild has said, in general, the guild will put its stamp of approval on it when we reach 75% support. We don't want to get to 100 because then there's no plausible deniability for the person that works at the company that isn't allowed to say that. They can say, I didn't vote for that. That's okay. 25% can dissent. We don't want to be just 50% because that's just simple majority. So we said 75 for just to pick a number. So start an idea, get it going, get people interested in it. As soon as you say 75%, people say yes of the registered members, or in some cases the Discord will be enough. Then we can say the guild, which is a body of hundreds or thousands of people in the field, says X. And we hope that carries the similar weight in the future of 100 climate scientists say that we're doomed. Like we want people to listen to that collective statement that we make, saying, 500 people in the field of XR said we should change this thing. Hopefully that is taken more seriously than those first 3 people who got together and started it by themselves. But it has to reach a level of support that everybody will buy into.
Great. Let's have a big hand for the XR Guild and all they share.